Hello, and welcome to today's webinar presentation on the topic of the business of augmented reality. My name's Christine Perret, and I'm going to deliver today's session. I want to begin by thanking the IEEE for hosting today's webinar. Today's presentation is the fourth in a series of webinars designed to inform and raise awareness about augmented reality topics in a vendor-neutral way. In our previous episodes, I focused extensively on the technology and its uses. Today's session concentrates on the other side of the coin, the business of this very young technology and those who are investing and most likely to reap its rewards. I will provide you the names of companies and explain how they fit into the ecosystem. I'll wrap up with some recommendations for success on a segment-by-segment basis. My presentation will take about 50 minutes, and we'll have some time at the end for questions from the audience. To ask a question, please use the chat feature and type your question directly to David, the host. We'll get to as many of your questions at the end as possible. So let's go ahead and get started now. I'm an independent consultant and I study spines. That's the conjunction of space and time, and I use these to build technology and business landscapes. On top of those landscapes, I help develop initiatives for innovation, I nurture communities, and I provide consulting services to my clients. And it's based on all of this research that I'm speaking with you today about the business of augmented reality. But just before I get too deeply into all of that, I want to make sure that I am using the same definition as all of you out there about what exactly augmented reality is. I define it as a set of user experiences. I say augmented reality experiences can alter our perception of reality, both based on our geospatial position and other inputs of context, and then using the context, I can synchronize digital content on my device with the reality. So by synchronizing the reality with the digital, I can have a new experience. And this slide is a figure that I've used several times in my past webinars to explain to you just how augmented reality works behind the scenes. Instead of going through that today, I invite you to visit our past episodes in this series to get more background on the concepts or the tools and some of the uses of augmented reality. Today's webcast, as I said, is going to focus on the business aspects. So I'm going to talk about the ecosystem, the businesses and the segments. I'll be talking about the kinds of investments that are made by companies in the ecosystem and how they might help companies get ahead. But really, everyone wants to know is how do you turn an investment into a profitable venture? How do you generate revenues? What are the business models and who's paying for augmented reality features and services? And in the last few minutes, I'll be making some recommendations about business strategies that different companies can use to be successful. Now, you're probably asking yourself, and the reason you joined this webinar is because you really wanted to know the answer to a simple question: how much does it cost? Well, I think that it's fair to say it depends. First of all, it depends if you're what kind of a user you are. Are you a consumer? Are you going to be using augmented reality for your personal uses? Then what do you need it to do? Are you willing to expose some of your personal information? Are you tolerant to seeing advertising and to having that be part of the business model? Do you want augmented reality to be a feature of something else you already use, maybe your weather application or your navigation services? Or do you really want it to be kept alone? And all of these factors will determine how much you need to pay or how much you will be asked to pay. It may be nothing and it may be something. If you're an enterprise and you're thinking of using augmented reality for the purpose of solving some kind of an obstacle or a challenge, then you're going to need to put together for yourself a bit of a business plan describing how you'll measure the success of augmented reality, what kinds of existing digital resources and physical resources you have to put into it, how they weave together in a story, a narrative. And then you'll be looking for vendors, systems integrators, or developers to partner with. That's what we call now business relationships, partnerships. And based on how you negotiate those, there'll be a fee associated with your final AR experience or project. Now, the bigger question, and if that wasn't enough, an even bigger question is what is the return on investment you can expect from augmented reality? We'll get back to that at the end of this webinar, but I also want to explain how we come about to answering this kind of a simple question, but with a lot of components. Now, the way I'm going to approach the next 10 to 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, is I'm going to go through a figure of the augmented reality ecosystem. And for each segment, I'm going to define it. I'm going to give you some example companies and tell you about the trends to expect. There are 5 segments if you count the technology providers of the augmented reality ecosystem. You could also include the customers or the user buyers as a 6th segment of the ecosystem, and I've spoken about that one before in my earlier episodes. These users and these buyers of augmented reality, they are firmly planted in the physical world. So over on the right-hand side of this figure, and they receive information from the digital world from their device, and the physical world is detected and captured by the device. So that's why the red arrows are going from the physical world into the digital world and out of the digital world into the physical world. Now, these other segments, each one individually I'm going to be talking about, but I want to just mention that the lower dark green bar is underlying all the 4 other segments. So this enablers bar is important and valuable to the success of the other segments, and all of those other segments are in some way or another investing and paying for the value that their enablers offer. Let's start with the first, content providers and publishers segment. Today with the Web 2.0, everybody and every business can be a content provider or publisher. It may be external, it may be internal. In other words, you may write a blog, but it's only for yourself. You as a business may have some models and some other digital content, but you don't share that outside of your business. But still, for the purposes of augmented reality, you have content. And every augmented reality experience uses digital content. We use digital content to overlay the physical world target, like with graphics, could be 2D graphics, a schematic or a 3D model, could be photos, animations, video, or text. Content providers generally classify themselves along what the target audiences they have. Remember, I mentioned you could be publishing your blog just for yourself or for your family members and friends, or you may have a different set of goals. You may be a brand that wants to communicate with all of your customers or your prospective customers. You may be an educational institution and you want to communicate with students. There are many, many different kinds of employees and partners in businesses that we need to speak with or communicate with using content. So content is very key to the whole equation, and it's very diverse as well. So it's not surprising that I haven't listed for you on this slide the thousands of businesses that have begun to AR enable part of their digital assets. They've begun the process of attaching their digital assets to something in the physical world, a person, a place, or an object. So that seems like, well, what could I tell you about them in a general way? We can say that those companies that have content that's targeting consumers could be companies in the automotive industry, such as those I've mentioned here, VW, Audi, BMW, even Mercedes. Every German automotive manufacturer has been providing some type of an AR-assisted sales tool for already a year or more. You might be a content provider. You might want to provide maps to people to help them find their way. And the company here, it's a Nokia company, is an example of one that has been using an augmented reality view to help people find their way. If you are providing products or services to the home for maybe interior design or buying a home or renting a new place to live, there are many, many examples of augmented reality for use in the home. I put a picture of the table and chairs because IKEA has a very successful augmented reality assisted catalog. But they're not the only ones. You might have an event, some kind of a concert or a trade show that you would like to attract people to and make it easier for them to understand and to find their way. You might provide an augmented reality assisted application for that event, for the visitors of that event. Or you might be a museum or be the management of a cultural heritage site, and you would want to provide augmented reality assisted services to the visitors of your venue. Again, back to the audiences, if you are a business and you are looking to communicate with your employees or your partners, then there are many, many examples, and I believe that all industries one day will use augmented reality to communicate. On this list over here on the right-hand side, I just mentioned a few that have either publicly or gently announced their use of augmented reality. Well, more and more what we're seeing with the content providers is that instead of having augmented reality be a standalone, isolated application or a way of delivering only a portion of their information, they're starting to think of augmented reality as a feature or a way of looking at a visualization feature of their content. One of the earliest groups, and certainly very active groups, to use augmented reality are the brands and merchants, and they've been successfully using AR for several years, and their findings are so encouraging that they're going to continue to increase their use of AR, but in the future I believe we'll have less of a gimmick and more of a utilitarian function. So I will be looking for that. And in addition, the people who are hiring and independents or using creative companies, their advertising and graphics companies, to provide augmented reality, more and more those skills and tools are going to be coming in-house for the brands and merchants, just like they've already done for their web services. Businesses, I mentioned previously, are increasingly using augmented reality to communicate, but they're experimenting with it as a part of a complex workflow or to communicate about safety or perhaps about an upcoming program that they want people to be engaged with. Now I'm going to talk about experience packaging segment. This is the only segment that didn't exist before augmented reality. We can say that people have been publishing content digitally already for a decade or more, and there are others that you'll see the other segments already existed as well. Experience packaging means those who are providing services and software to attach the digital world's assets to the physical world. Companies in this segment, as I've explained them in the past webinar on AR today, are very diverse. They have a lot of skills, and there's thousands of qualified augmented reality experience designers. So just like the content publishers, I can't put them all up on the screen, but I can tell you that they do have a lot of skills in experience design, information management, and programming. There are lots of companies that are providing software development kits. I've mentioned a few of these in our past webinars as well. One of the things I could say about the companies in this segment is that There are many more in Europe and in Asia than in other parts of the world. In the UK alone, there's probably several dozen, and in Holland and Italy and some of the Eastern European countries also have a great number of experienced designers. Now, one of the trends about the experience packaging segment is that it broke up. It began to fragment between those who were really designing the software experiences and who had expertise in the design of the experience, and those who just published the tools or who published the tools for the developers. And over time, what's happened is the developers themselves have said, that tool doesn't meet all of my needs, so I'm going to become a tool provider myself. And this causes a loop where these two segments, these sub-segments, are really tightly intertwined. That's beginning to lower. One of the things about that process is that there's a lower barrier to entry, and so more and more companies and individuals are entering the top block. And gradually, the tool providers themselves are getting more intertwined with the enablers. So this is a trend that we've already seen over the last 6 months or more, and it's going to continue rapidly. The third segment is the discovery and delivery segment. They really focus very much on the communications and the transmission. The discovery means to find where there are AR experiences, and then delivery is to transmit the content for producing that. These companies in this segment include network operators and cloud service providers, such as those I've put up here on the left-hand side of the screen. But this is a relatively new and very, very low level of development. The companies are not sure how they're going to charge for these services, and they're not sure how much demand there will be. So there's reticence to invest very much at this stage. In place, since there isn't a very well-developed segment for discovery, social media and the web have become the important mechanisms for people to discover AR experiences. In the future, if the network operators and the cloud service providers begin to enter, they'll be able to differentiate themselves on the basis of being able to have more local content or regional context. Maybe they will offer, along with their augmented reality, some personal data services, such as personal data management lockers. They'll be able to perhaps add an extra level of security and access control so that nobody's accessing your data about your experience, or maybe they will have your permission to disclose information about AR users so that they can provide services to other companies. In general, also, we're going to see application stores become more involved in experience catalogs, or maybe there will be a separate and new group of companies that offer AR experience catalogs. We will see. The fourth segment are the device providers. This is where two things happen. As I said before with the red arrows at the beginning, this is where we acquire the user's context. We begin to understand what's going on, where is that user, what are they looking at, what movements are they making, and then at the same time providing the actual presentation. Again, if you wish to have more information about these two concepts, I invite you to go to the Introduction to AR webinar. One of the things that I want to drive home about this is that there isn't such thing as an AR-only device. No one needs or wants that. We need integrated devices, devices that have many, many functions, such as those that are provided by Google, Apple, Samsung, Microsoft. Smartphones and tablets are very, very popular devices today for augmented reality because we really haven't come to the mainstream of personal devices. But very soon, based on what I've seen, we will have personal displays, and they will come from companies such as those I've listed on this slide: Vuzix, Epson, Samsung, Lumos, and there are probably about 10 more that we haven't yet heard of or haven't become household names. The trends around devices is that the hardware is getting more and more sophisticated and the number of sensors is growing rapidly. We're also going to see a variety of new displays like flexible displays and displays on the wrist or displays that are worn on your head. Greater camera control is going to be very important for producing good experiences with live visual augmented reality. There'll be more technologies for accelerating computation that will get us to more feature extractions and faster graphic renderings. Then you're going to be hearing about something called the 3D capture, or some people call it the 3GBD for the graphics RGB, and depth, D for depth. There'll also be more sensors for motion and positioning analysis, and these will integrate more and more into the mobile operating system itself and with the AR enablers below. In fact, one of the things I introduced at the beginning of this series is the fact that these devices are fragmenting. They're breaking up, and there's more and more components, and they're not nearly as chaotic as this image suggests. In fact, there are many very good reasons for breaking these up as we distribute the load computationally, the power storage, and take advantage of the many new developments in technology such as Internet of Things and wearable displays. The last segment are the enablers that are used for the entire AR chain as well as other computing and communications tasks. This segment covers all the enabling technologies such as context acquisition, which I mentioned before, graphics rendering, graphics processing, user interface, application programming interfaces such as for touch, speech, or motion, gestures, all the session and transport enablers, and these can be integrated together with the operating system and the application frameworks. Also, there are enabling technologies for managing the personal data and the security of the device or the network connection that you're on. Companies in this segment, there are many companies, most of them very large, as you can see on this screen. They include the semiconductor companies, sensor companies, and those who are offering the mobile operating systems such as Apple, Google, Samsung, and Eclipse Foundation. In general, the trend is towards an increasing sensitivity of all of these sensors and actuators, and that will give us better context. The hardware is getting more and more specialized and more integrated with the devices. And what I've noticed is more and more standards are relevant in this enabler segment so that the providers of enablers can sell to more different device types. Now let's talk about investing in the augmented reality industry. Well, right now, let's just start with the assumption that on the left-hand side are the products and services that you need to deliver augmented reality to the customers, and that the customers in many cases are not aware of their requirements or their needs, but some of them are interested in augmented reality and the value that it might bring. So how can we invest to drive AR adoption and use? The first, and what's been going on for the last 10 or 12 years, is research and development into the core enablers and the development eventually of certain products. In parallel, over the last few years, we've seen more and more investment in market education and sales, and that's increasing the customer interest. Together, when these are working properly, the desires of the customer are communicated to the providers of the solutions, and there will emerge a technology and business channel that helps to customize the products to meet the needs of the customers. So this is the big picture I'd like to introduce for now, and we're going to look in more deeply at the two green arrows and what that means, who's doing it. So for developing more AR-enabled solutions, requires a lot of research, and this has been going on for a long time, as I said, but it's also getting more and more targeted. So we're seeing more research being conducted on user experiences, on accuracy of getting the context, better registration with the real world. What I mean by that is more sharp registration between the digital asset and exactly the physical world target. So when you point at something, the digital image isn't off to the side or jumping around, as is often the case today. So we need more research to make sure those are stable and very, very tightly connected to the real world at a lower power consumption. This is a critical need we have, and it'll come up over and over again in the next few sections. Well, once you have good results from your research programs, you need to decide, are you going to make them available to many people, and how? Will you be providing those or introducing those new technologies into a standards development process, into products or tools that your company might build? And you might want to determine if it's better for you to buy a new technology or a complementary technology, or to build it. And that's when, if it turns out that it's faster to market and less expensive for you to acquire than to build, then you're going to be making an acquisition. Now let's talk about the development of the market and the education of the future customers. Well, we have to know what they need. What are their desires? Just like the Minority Report did 10 or 12 years ago, we're today still introducing new concepts to consumers and asking them to give us feedback through pilots and test beds and other demonstrations, because that's really the only way that people can start to expand their minds and get their desires or their needs known. So companies are organizing events, stimulating discussion about augmented reality on social media, and certainly briefing thought leaders and receiving insights from those analysts and media. Well, I think that if I were to summarize who have been the major investors to date in augmented reality, would certainly begin at the top with the European Commission, which since the year 2000 has been funding, in collaboration with EU countries, with European Union countries, research and development into augmented reality. This has been highly successful in Germany, for example, where many companies are beginning to adopt augmented reality in their manufacturing systems. In addition to these very large investments of research over the last 10, 15 years, there are many hardware companies, semiconductors, sensors, and display providers who see augmented reality as one of the uses for their technology. Not the only one, but certainly one of the important uses for their technologies. And there's also been a lot of in-kind or human investment by experienced designers who are learning about how to design interaction and to simplify the interactivity between the physical and digital worlds. In addition, the IEEE Standards Association, the IEEE itself, has had an international symposium of mixed and augmented reality. That started as early as, I think, in the late 90s. The IEEE also has some web pages about the innovations around augmented reality. They are producing this series of webinars and Google Plus Hangouts called AR in Your Future. They also provide demonstrations of augmented reality at industry events. And there's a new program called the Industry Connections Program for Augmented Reality, in which they are going to have an online forum and discussions about the needs for AR in the future. There are also many other cross-disciplinary collaborations that I'm involved in, for example, having to do with AR and learning and AR and manufacturing. It's very exciting work that's being supported by the IEEE today. Now, how do we take those investments and turn them into real business, into real revenues? I always think that you have to start talking about revenues by asking yourself, what are you measuring? Yes, it's easy to measure money, but what is the value that you're providing in return for that? You have to deliver new value that both the supplier and the recipient can measure in order to have a business. So in this case, today I think it's not necessary to invent something new. We should reuse the business metrics, the key performance indicators that we have for other digital technologies. The number of clicks or interactions people have with digital assets, the amount of time that they spend using a particular digital tool, those are all relevant metrics. How well someone retains or associates positive thoughts with a brand, those are also metrics that are very well established. You also have to understand and remember that just like in other industries, consumers are very sensitive to high price, they're highly sensitive to low price. They'll adopt something if it's free. And enterprises are generally risk averse and relatively slow to change compared with consumers. So if I were going to advise some content providers about how to turn their investments into revenues, I'd say the brands and merchants have to measure their customer awareness. Is AR helping them to engage more deeply or to have increased customer awareness? And in the end, do the AR experiences produce greater sales? Enterprises will be looking at the same kinds of metrics as they have for other IT investments, such as the reduction of errors or cost, time to market, or increased human productivity as a result of training and learning with augmented reality assisted tools. And the traditional content publisher might want to bring new value by making their content more easy to consume or more valuable. And in those cases, they might charge on a pay-for-use basis, a subscription basis, or have advertising appear in or around their content. In the experience packaging segment, as I said, these are people who are providing mainly bespoke solutions. They generate revenue based on their work for hire. They can also establish revenue sharing relationships with content publishers. So a content publisher might have some entertainment value or some entertainment assets that they'd like to put into AR view. The experience designer might help to put that in the view and then have some revenues when the app experiences are sold on an app store. Or an experience designer might generate their own content and post it up on an app store and then charge on a pay-per-view or use or download or a subscription basis, or like the content publishers, charge advertisers to be put into the experience. I've mentioned that the discovery and delivery segment is very, very early and young and pretty hard to tell where that's going to go. But if it were to develop, I think that they could provide value and they could measure that value in terms of performance. Lower response time for AR experiences to begin, or better tracking and registration with the real world. They could also make their systems, they could differentiate on the basis of ease of use, and they could gather but protect the user or digital asset analytics. So understanding how many accesses there has been, where people are using augmented reality most, how long they're spending on those experiences. These are information assets that discovery and delivery providers could then resell as long as they had a contractual relationship that permitted that. They could also provide an extra layer of security and privacy as long as they had some type of a contract that had clear quality metrics. Well, now that we're talking about devices, so we think about phones and smartphones and tablets. They could be more flexible and faster, and they could provide a better user experience. I would pay more for a device that has a better user experience, or maybe that consumes less power, so I have a longer battery life. I might also pay extra for higher resolution graphics or more connectivity to my personal peripherals, such as my smartwatch or my Fitbit or some other component that I have that's not related to augmented reality, but I'll still pay more for it because it's integrated and easy to use. Generally, devices are sold on a per unit basis. Even if that's tens of thousands or millions of devices, it's still sold on a per unit basis. Or intellectual properties can be licensed also in a number of unit basis. AR technology enablers are going to be valuable. They could be differentiated on the basis of lower power consumption, higher quality components, maybe a higher quality camera or a better GPS or a more stable compass. These are components that make a big difference in the quality of the AR experience that the device manufacturer can provide. We also see maybe that enablers will differentiate themselves on the basis of standards or support for these different APIs so that those enablers can be used in many, many different devices without having to rewrite the software. Enabling component technology providers are very sensitive to their intellectual property, and they patent those intellectual properties and they protect them so that then they can license them to others. Let's talk now a little bit more about business strategies that these different segments of the AR ecosystem could adopt. I'd like to start off by sharing my 2 rules of thumb on having a successful business with augmented reality. The first is, of course, augmented reality it only exists when you connect the physical and the digital world. Some people tend to forget that, and they want to connect a digital world asset with another digital world asset. That's not augmented reality anymore. But it's not valuable, and you won't be successful unless it contributes to some value, unless it contributes to the success of that person who's using it repeatedly. It's got to be used in combination with something else, and it has to be work more than once. It's very, very important not to have technologies or experiences that are only good for one use. Next rule of thumb is that the greatest value of AR is when it's used as part of a multi-step process. So, for example, if you've got a lot of data, complex data that you'd like to visualize in order to make good decisions, augmented reality is very helpful in that context. The more data there is, or sometimes we call that big data, the more important rapid visualization becomes. And the more complex the workflow or the decision you're trying to make, the more valuable rapid visualization will become. So those are 2 rules of thumb. Now, content providers and publishers. What should they do to have a good, strong business strategy with augmented reality? They should make AR part of a complete communications program, not just an isolated activity. Enterprises need to target those places where the human is a risk factor in a workflow and add augmented reality for that human. It makes no sense to add augmented reality where you can completely automate a workflow with a robot. And you should also introduce augmented reality only in phases, very methodically, so as to not overwhelm the user or introduce more errors into the workflow you're trying to streamline. You should be very, very careful about listening to and responding to user needs. Traditional content publishers can have successful business strategies by introducing AR as a novel experience associated with their content. Try to find those things that you can't do any other way. In other words, I can only do these things with augmented reality. And then they also need to be investigating how to develop micropayments or in-app payments so that they can generate revenues on very small increments of information. Experience packaging developers should be focusing on how to really exceed their client objectives for communications or learning or decision-making support. They should design interactions that are very intuitive and simple. And believe me, you can tell the difference between an intuitive interaction and a complicated, confusing one. Look for things that can't be achieved as easily without AR. In other words, use AR only when it makes sense. And don't reinvent the wheel. If you can reduce the cost by using a standard or an open source project, you should do so if you're going to have a good business success, a good business strategy. Those companies that might in the future enter discovery and delivery segment should be partnering with others to measure and increase the AR experience quality and quantity. The number of experiences out there today is very, very small by comparison to what it has the potential to be. I've heard some really daunting statistics about the number of devices and the number of places that have AR associated with them, but very, very few interactions are actually taking place because people don't know they're there. They haven't discovered the AR experience that's associated with a place or an object. These people, this segment also can be very important in designing privacy into the original architecture and the delivery of that AR content to the individual. So personal data privacy is an area where it's very, very key to the success of this segment. Otherwise, they could really expose themselves to a lot of risk, which is probably one of the reasons they're not in AR today. So it's not enough to just protect the data from privacy. It's also important to protect from people who might want to be thieves in the real world, people who use cyber technologies or digital technologies to prey on others in the physical world. So there might be some really interesting ways of obfuscating the location, for example, so that the thief doesn't know that you've left your home. And the builders and providers of devices can have better success if they integrate higher quality components and they partner with good content and high quality services. They should promote AR capabilities that are inherent in their devices so that people will learn about them. They could promote connectivity to sensors that are not just in the device but maybe in the environment. They could also begin to promote their accuracy of the AR experiences produced by a device. And of course, the enablers, back to the last very, very important component of the AR ecosystem. AR enabling technology providers are more and more implementing standards so that they can interoperate with the maximum number of other components. They're also working very hard and should promote their power consumption profile, reducing the power consumption and also the latency of producing experiences. And I think that they'll always be a very successful segment. So who's already generating revenues with augmented reality? I've mentioned that there are many companies that are already brands and merchants as well as publishers of maps and other tools and technologies who are generating revenue today. There are experienced designers and developers that serve the brands and the merchants. They have been charging for their bespoke solutions now for already several years. I could mention, for example, some of the very successful ones, such as Blipar, Layer, Infinity AR, Gold Run, Gravity Jack, Explore Engage, Build AR. All these companies generate revenues today and have growing teams to respond to their customer needs. The enabling technology providers are also licensing technologies and sometimes selling some of their hardware to the device manufacturers. So you can see from this figure that there remain two segments that haven't been able to generate revenue yet. But I think that in time they also will be able to demonstrate value and then to generate new revenues. Well, now let's just summarize what this session has been about. I introduced the AR ecosystem to you. I spoke about the 5 different segments in addition to the customers or user segment. And I spoke about how each of those segments provides value in a different way, and I described some of the trends around those segments. There, unfortunately, are very, very few firm metrics or new business models that have been proven to work for augmented reality. In fact, to be perfectly honest, the existing business models around digital content in the physical world are pretty much serving us well. So it's maybe not necessary to create entirely new business models if you're successful licensing software or selling your services to someone who needs them. What we don't have are the metrics to measure exactly how people are using, how often they're using AR, and how it provides a significant value to them. We're still very much in the early phases of measuring. We do know that there have been very high and deep investments, as I mentioned, primarily by the European Commission and the EU countries, as well as companies that provide hardware. But to date, those investments have far exceeded the revenues generated by augmented reality. And what's interesting, speaking of investments, is how few venture capitalists and other investors have entered augmented reality. They've done so only in a peripheral way. I know of a few examples in the last 6 months of some head-worn display companies that have been well financed or have received good investment. But other than that, it seems that there is some reservations on the part of the professional investor. Perhaps that's because it's difficult to measure and predict the return on investment on a segment-by-segment or even a company-by-company basis at this early stage. I suspect that that is one of the factors. I've concluded the prepared remarks for today. Before I take questions, though, I'd like to remind you that, or invite you to join us beginning in the fall of 2014 for some other episodes in this series. I'll be speaking about open and interoperable augmented reality. You may know that this is one of the keys to market growth. I'll present the concepts, the reference architecture, and I'll describe some of the existing standards and emerging standards for open and interoperable augmented reality. In a separate episode, I'll present the scenarios that I've developed in collaboration with some other experts that describe how augmented reality might be used in the year 2020 or perhaps beyond. And some of those scenarios are very positive and others are very dark. I'll be going into more detail about those. And then I'll also have augmented reality in several industries. Just like last month I presented about urban augmented reality, in the fall I'll be presenting about the use of AR in complex manufacturing and the results of some pilots that have been going on. And I expect that there will be some other industries in which I can focus. Well, that ends my prepared remarks for today, David. Do you have any questions that have come from the audience that I could answer now?
Christine, we had a host of questions come in. I'm going to hone in on 3 of them that are really, really good. Thank you for the session today that you delivered. It was very informative. I hope we had a lot of business owners and CTOs and individuals in the sales realm on today's webinar session. They would have gotten a lot from your presentation. So without further ado, though, I will jump into the first question. Gentleman asks, if his company chooses not to adopt an augmented reality approach into his business model, will they fall behind? In the future, companies that do not utilize this technology in one way or another to generate a new revenue stream, are they going to suffer? So basically, I guess he's asking, if and when he has to jump on board before it hinders his business.
Well, I think those are difficult questions to answer, but everyone has to answer them individually or as a committee on behalf of a company. I think it brings to mind the way people thought in the early days about the Internet. People said, oh, I don't really need the Internet. I can do my business without it. And then later people said, oh, I don't really need the web. I don't need to put up a website, and I don't need to use e-commerce, and I don't need to have a presence in social media. And each of these successive waves, the people who were early to understand the benefits they took more risk, and in some cases that paid off, and others it doesn't. It really depends on the type of industry that you're in and the business that you're running. I think it's safe to say that companies that have a lot of assets in the physical world, campuses, utility companies, companies that have construction, architecture, engineer, where a lot of their work and the subject of their work is highly physical. Those are companies that are not, and industries that are not renowned for adopting early, and yet those companies in those industries who adopt early will have a very significant competitive advantage. So what I'm saying is, where you have a lot of assets in the physical world that are probably very well described in the digital world, that intersection is an important indicator. If most of your assets are in the digital world and they don't pertain to the physical world, I think the risk of getting left behind is relatively low. In other words, if all of your intellectual property, your value proposition is digital and there's no need for it to interact with that physical world and person, places, and things, don't worry about it. But for every business that has a fleet of cars, a healthcare establishment with a hospital to run, so many things around us in the physical world every day, transportation, smart cities, all of these physical things are documented and can benefit from their interaction with the digital world.
Very good. Thank you, Christine. Q&A question number 2 comes from somebody who put on their consumer hat, and they want a consumer perspective-based question. They ask of you, in your opinion, Christine, who consumers who become the target audience of AR-driven marketing campaigns, do you foresee them having the opportunity to opt out, if you will, of certain advertisements that may be tailored towards them? I guess it's, again, a tough question to answer, but if you could prognosticate for a little bit and kind of prophesize, what do you think? How will the consumer be able to either actively or reactively participate with augmented reality-driven marketing campaigns in the future?
Well, I very much believe that the brands and merchants who want to engage with consumers will also want what's best for their customers. So I don't anticipate there'll be a situation where you can't avoid it. I think, on the contrary, they'll want to make their AR experiences so valuable that you will lose, or you'll feel less fulfilled if you don't have the benefits. So I think that the smart people, and my money is with those smart people, will provide such value that the advertising in your face kind of experiences will be less and less over time. Secondly, for those who are not tolerant, or who are not who are very sensitive to that medium of advertising, may opt out. And I'm thinking of something that's very well established. Many magazines and online information portals, if you subscribe, you don't have the advertising. If you are not a subscriber, then you will see the ads as they appear to monetize that content. Also, think of the Kindle. When you purchase a Kindle, you have the option of having advertising appear on the home screen, or having that be a simple abstract graphic or photograph, whatever your choice. So there are already many mechanisms by which people can choose, and I believe that the smart brands and merchants would prefer to communicate with those who want to hear their message and who see value in those AR experiences, rather than trying to bombard people who don't want to receive that kind of message.
The last question, Christine, that thank you for that that answer. The last question I will ask will come, and it's kind of appropriate. This is an IEEE-SA hosted webinar, so we'll ask a standards question, and then I will let you wrap up our session today as we approach the top of the hour, and you can take us out. So on that note, question 3, from a standards perspective, do any standards surrounding augmented reality still need to be developed before a lot of these companies begin to adopt new business strategies using this technology? What are your thoughts on that, Christine?
Well, thanks, David. That's a really important question, and it's a delicate one because when standards are introduced too early in a market, they can contribute to kind of a stifling of innovation. I think some people see it that way. I think what's important is for people to be thinking about where are there appropriate interfaces for standardization. I emphasized in this presentation that those make the most business sense at the very low level enabling components of technology. Rather, I don't believe that there will be a lot of standardization in the near or distant future up at the experience level, at the application level. There are some places there, such as recognizing standard gestures or standard words, that would be very beneficial for the user if you didn't have to relearn gestures or need to learn new habits. But in the middle area between the low-level enabling technologies and hardware, which have to be interoperable with so many of the upper layers of technology, and the very top of the stack, where I don't think standards are going to be around anytime soon, I think that there are some places around data management is one of the areas that I think will be is very important for standardization, is the interfaces for requesting and tracking the use of data, revisioning databases. That seems like an area where without standards, we're going to have a lot of interoperability problems. Another potential area for standardization is in the file formats. I'm thinking here specifically about the 3D file formats. Augmented reality uses 3D not only for acquiring the context and understanding the environment of the user, but also returning digital assets that themselves are 3D models. Right now there's too many choices and too many different 3D file formats, making it very confusing and reducing our ability to reach the mass market and reducing interoperability. So those are some of the areas that I would feel strongly that there'll be some changes in those specific areas: the database management, database versioning, tracking, and the area of 3D file formats. Well, thank you for those excellent questions, David. That concludes our webinar today. I want to thank everybody for their time and participation. I also want to inform you about the next episode in our series. Will be taking place next week on Thursday, June 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. The IEEE is hosting, and I will moderate, a Google Hangout panel discussion with experts from HERE, a Nokia company, Mataio, the leading tools provider, and Daiquiri, an important augmented reality experience developer. I look forward to their sharing their thoughts on the topic of generating new revenues with AR, and I hope you will join us. For more information on viewing that session, please visit the IEEE Standards Association Google Plus page. And finally, thank you again, the IEEE, for giving me the opportunity to bring you today's webinar. Have a great day, everyone.